This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
In the wake of the appalling incidents in Paphos and Limassol last week, this week's programme is dedicated to a discussion about the rise of fascism and what's happening in Cyprus.
These people are against immigrants, and not generally speaking immigrants, because obviously there are many Russians and Polish and Bulgarian and EU immigrants in Cyprus. They are against immigrants of a certain color, of a certain religion, from a certain space abroad, and this betrays racism.
There's only been one topic very much on everyone's minds in the last week or 10 days here in Cyprus, and that is appalling behaviour that we've seen where people have beaten up immigrants, smashed their properties, and it does seem that Cyprus is following in the footsteps of some well-documented EU countries in going down the fascist route. So I've asked two experts to join me on this week's programme to discuss the issues. They are Nikos Trimikliniotis, Professor at the University of Nicosia and Director of their Centre for Fundamental Rights. Also joining us from the University of Nicosia is Associate Professor of Political Science, Yorgos Haralambous. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Can I start, Nikos, with you just to tell me a little bit of the background? This is something that I believe has been brewing for a long time, but it came to a head last week, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, this is not something that came out of the blue. It's something that was brewing for some time. The way the climate was organized and of course reached the climax with the events that developed. They were expecting this to happen at some point. The point is that there is a tipping point. Once it's not just about violent rhetoric or attack on one individual here and there. We are talking about an organized attack against migrants and against the migrants in their homes who happen to be the most integrated migrants in the community of Cloraga. And I'm saying this and because we've been following this. We had a project and we had on the site visits to Cloraga since 2020 when a new approach was taken there about the situation in Cloraga with demonstrations and kind of machismo showed by the far right coming in, organizing events, we want migrants out and all this. But this was concentrated at the time about a kind of a derelict, in squalid condition complex called St. Nicholas, which is in Cloraga, but it has about 250 people there, sort of homes there in this complex, which was the kind of the hub of very poor migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, who went there. Some were paying rent, some were not, and it was creating a big havoc there. And there was a long conflict with the municipality. The mayor himself, who was very, very much against this, they cut off the water, the electricity, they stopped collecting the rubbish from the place. There was issues about court order. So this was brewing for some time about that. Now, what is different with that is that when the government in August decided to go in and count who's there, it actually found 270 people living there and decided to relocate them. So at the time when this happened, it was completely empty. It was only then that this far right mob comes in and they attack not St. Nicholas, but people in the community in their homes who had been there for 15, 20 years and are completely fully integrated. They smashed shops, like a restaurant owned by a Syrian. They were marked specific houses. So afterwards, we went and did an on-site visit the following day of the two race riots. And this is why my conclusion, and the people who were with me, I went there with the MP from the Green Party, Alexandra Atalidou, and her parliamentary associate, Orestes Matsas, and we spoke to the victims, we spoke to over 25 people, we found markings on the doors, on outside the houses that were attacked, with specific symbols and blue color, and that's why we concluded, without any doubt, that this was a pogrom. It wasn't just one. And I think this is an attack of a different quality because it's targeted against integrated migrants, it's targeted their homes, there was an attack on children, and it marks a significant, a radical change in the tactics and the scale of the problem.
Can I come over to Yorgos for a moment? You study political science, Yorgos. I mean, what Nikos has just described, making markings on certain buildings which indicates to a mob that this is where you should attack. We've seen that before if we look back in history, haven't we?
Yes, of course. The key point here is that this was organized from before, and it continued a week after. So within a week, we had 3 pre-organized pogroms, and there are rumors going around on the internet these days that these mobs are planning another attack, probably in Nicosia. But in the same way, we have seen such attacks before in history and elsewhere. In the same way, we see a wave of solidarity arriving in the aftermath of such incidents. Therefore, since about 10 days ago, there have been movements and organized civil society individuals and groups who have been mobilizing to protect immigrants, to counteract on the hate rhetoric and the violent behavior of the fascists, and also to try and organize in order to prevent such incidents from happening again. So there is, on the one hand, a rise, and as Nikos said, a change in tactics on behalf of the far right, but at the same time there is a response of solidarity by the social movements here on the island.
Well, that's at least something I suppose we can take positive from all of this. But if we talk about this rise in the far right here, it seems to me that it all started, well, some time ago, but there's a lot of hate rhetoric online, on social media. Pretty well all Cypriots I know are either on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. It's mostly Facebook, I think, and Twitter. And this hate rhetoric, as far as I'm aware, correct me Nikos if I'm wrong, is actually against the law and is punishable. Have we found that there have been any cases where this has been followed up? Because you need to stamp on things very quickly when this starts to escalate, don't you?
Well, look, no. Unfortunately, the only case, the only conviction that we have is the case of the attack, the kind of verbal attack, which went viral on Instagram against a Russian woman by 2 Cypriot women in a parking place, which was an incident, which is an unacceptable incident, but that was really not directed against the kind of political violence instigated in terms of the rhetoric, because we have now a very, very clear incitement to racial hatred and incitement to violence against migrants on Twitter and on Facebook in particular by many, many groups and many individuals. There has been no action against that. In fact, there have been complaints to the police about threat of violence on individuals who went to the police and complained about it, and nothing has been done when it comes to these sort of things. I mean, there have been cases where the police did intervene and asked the individuals to correct and apologize and that sort of thing, but there has been no conviction at all on this matter. So, although this is prohibited violence, the police say that we need more to strengthen the instruments relating to this, the legal instruments. And always say that we don't have the capacity to actually go around and monitor and address all these kind of wide racial, the rhetoric on incitement.
That seems like a pretty poor excuse to me, because I know people who have actually reported to the police and taken screenshots. So the evidence is very much in their hands. We have a cybercrime unit which seems to be quite good at chasing up some things, and it just seems to me that they're really not bothered to do this. This brings me to the comments I've heard. Do correct me, because I know you've been there, whether I'm wrong, and that is that if we move to the Limassol incidents last weekend, there were actually police on the scene who stood back and didn't intervene when, let's say, delivery drivers were getting beaten up or shops were being smashed.
Yes, there are accounts, the first-hand accounts, which said exactly that the police did not intervene when the fascists were breaking immigrant shops or otherwise being violent. There was even one account which was published in Kathimerini newspaper, which said that police did not intervene when a young Asian immigrant was beaten up himself during the Limassol incident. So the problem obviously goes deep into the state and concerns not only police tactics and the overall mentality of the police as regards such behavior, but also reaches up to the top echelons of the state, meaning that hate speech and hate rhetoric or variations of such rhetoric have been voiced systematically by church leaders and even high-ranking politicians. One example was last week when the leader said that we should secure human rights to those who are allowed to have them. He actually said that. And obviously there was a lot of reaction to that, and then he was asked about it, and he said that he meant illegal immigrants, but the damage was done. And therefore the point is that there are problems with hate speech ranging from society to the very core of the state.
Yeah, and let's just be very clear here, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, illegal immigrant or not, every human being is covered by human rights.
That's precisely why what Marinos Sisopoulos said that on the day of the first pogrom in Chloragou was so unacceptable and beyond any reasonable ethics. So that's the point, that by saying such things and implying sometimes hatred, even if not voicing it directly and explicitly, causes a lot of damage because it is channeled into society in the form of propaganda, and it aggravates several groups and individuals, and it encourages such behavior like the one we saw in Chloragou and in Limassol last week.
I'm interested that you mentioned that this is going right to the heart of our state. I have tried to get the Justice Minister to talk to me, and I've been told that she's cancelled all interviews. So I'm not sure quite why she's bothered about talking and putting her point of view. And the other thing I want to say is this all starts in our schools. The way we teach our kids is the first step towards thinking of others as not as good as us, is it not? You're both educators, and I've also tried to contact the Minister of Education, who was bleating about reforms in July, and she also apparently is putting off talking to me. I can't understand why people are just absorbing the sound bites that these members of the government put out and not being given a chance to question them.
Not only of the government, more broadly. I'll let Nikos answer this because he's the expert. Let me very briefly say that the educational system operates in such a way that otherness and otherization are central pillars of history teaching. And obviously this undermines the spirit of diversity and difference, and instead of that, what becomes consolidated through the educational system is a sense of specialness among the Greek Cypriots and even superiority opposite other groups such as the Turkish Cypriots, the Turks, or third country immigrants. But Nikos knows much more about the lack of integration of foreign students in Cypriot schools and high schools, so maybe he can comment on that.
Yes, do that, Nikos, because it is basically, as I said, laying the groundwork for future kids. Some of the youngsters on those pogroms must have been just teenagers.
Yes, the whole thing was organized. A very large number of the people in the race riots and the pogroms were actually students between the ages of 15 to 25. Maybe even younger. I mean, this was 15 to 18, definitely a very large number, with sticks and baseball bats.
Molotov cocktails, for heaven's sake, in the middle of one of our tourist towns.
Look, I have delivered to the police yesterday 2 of these things because they were left there lying around from Florida. So yesterday I went to the police station. I gave them things that we have collected. And in fact, today I'm going to Paphos, to Florida again, to show them where we found this. But let me comment on three key interconnected points. Yorgos mentioned something extremely important, which goes to the heart not just of the education system, but also of the way the kind of the public sphere is organized. The right to have rights. When we have a leader of a political party talking about only a group of people have rights, denying what Hannah Arendt said, the right to have rights, is a fundamental issue if we're dealing with a democratic state or not, if we have the rule of law or not. When we already, in fact, his clarification makes it even more serious because he essentially said illegal immigrants have no human rights. And there's no, maybe they have specific things, but human rights apply to all, as we said. You mentioned the Minister of Education and the Minister of Justice are no longer going on television or speaking to anybody or speaking to interviews. Well, look, when the Minister of Justice did go on television for an interview and she spoke about the whole matter, first of all, she said that we are in full control of the situation. We know what's going on. Everything is fine. We know what's happening. Everything's operational thing, and we will move to stop the violence. After that, there was more violence. But the concern that has been in the media afterwards was not that they failed to protect people, as you said. And I have spoken to eyewitnesses who told me themselves in Limassol, they saw the police in front of them. There are people who told us that they were attacked and they did nothing. The minister was cautioned by the president, not because of their failure, which was obviously an embarrassing situation, but because she had a meeting with the Syrians who were very upset with the situation. They created a kind of a whole story that one of the person who went to television was somebody who was wanted for another thing, and that he's the guy who made the comments about if the police doesn't do anything, they would turn Paphos upside down. So the whole thing became, rather than being an issue of protecting people as there is a duty by the police, an issue of embarrassment as a result of pressure from the far right, from the racists. And that's the problem. Now, on education, I am very, very concerned. On Thursday, the schools are opening again. And what's going to happen inside the schools is really the major thing that will determine how the violence is going to take place now. So we're dealing now with the immediate aftermath of this general violence, organized violence by the far right. with a general climate of racism and anti-immigrant sentiment, and now it's like appeasing these people, saying, don't worry, we have things under control, we're organizing, we're stopping the flows, we are doing things, there's less immigrants coming in, illegal immigrants, we will stamp them out, don't worry. So instead of dealing with the root of the problem, which is the organized violence, the deep-rooted hatred has been organized all this time. Now they agreed to go and touch and address the agenda set by the far right. Inside the schools, there is a complete failure to address this issue. I agree with you that there has been a failure, a denial to do anything positive to involve, to allow migrants to properly participate and belong, although there have been some programs organized by the schools themselves. There hasn't been an integration program since 2012, a general integration program. In fact, they received €1.5 million to €2 million to do a new integration program. They prepared one, they paid organizations to do it. It's a very, very poor integration program. It's a program to involve people, and it's a very problematic thing. But even that was not implemented because it wasn't approved by the previous government, and the new government has not approved it either. So there is a general problem. The education system is really not doing what it should be doing. In fact, it is a breeding ground, and it is a place where the far right, the neo-Nazi party of Cyprus, is recruiting people inside schools, from late primary school to secondary schools. And unless we address this problem, one small incident inside the schools may spark all sorts of big problems. And I think the far right will instigate this. So this is the moment where, we should stamp out this violence. And there are things that can be done. But, the government spokesman said that this was not a problem. He gave an interview and said, no, this was not a problem. There's no evidence that it was a problem.
And similarly, the president of the parliament called the fascists hooligans, depoliticizing the issue. Therefore, what Nikos is saying is that the whole approach by the government is trying to shift the emphasis from neo-fascism to something that is entirely something else. It has to do with youth delinquency or anything else.
Gentlemen, I have to interrupt you because we're getting really short of time, and it's very clear as well the media have been complicit to a large degree in the way these incidents have been reported. And yes, hooliganism and vandalism is one thing, and racist attacks is something completely different. But very quickly, I was interested to see that the Labour Minister this week said that we need migrants, that the economy cannot survive without them. Now, I think most of us know that. So this business of also saying illegal migrants, we want to get rid of them, but then people are attacking legal refugees, and we're also stopping a lot of these people from contributing positively to our economy. Very quickly, a comment on that from both of you.
Well, I think this is the schizophrenia of the whole thing. I mean, I don't want to pathologize this, of course, but what I'm trying to say, on the one hand, the economic development of this country has been based on the migrant labor. We have 200,000 non-Cypriot living contributing to the economy. In fact, all the research shows that about 53% of the development of the economy between 1990 to 2005, just before accession to the EU, is based on migrant labor. Since then, again, has been a massive contribution of the work. They are, of course, not just contributing, they're also being exploited, super exploited, because of their vulnerable position. Not all of them, but the vast majority of these people, including irregular migrants. And this story about legality and illegality is a very problematic thing. Anybody who is here, who is overstayed, is considered to be an illegal immigrant. Anybody who enters irregularly is considered to be an illegal immigrant. Now, this is obviously not a criminal situation, although it is criminalized in Cypriot law. It is a broader question. And most of the countries, to address this question, say, okay, let's try and find out, regularize those who can regularize, and address this problem, and deal with the big issue that is or bringing a lot of people in desperate situation. And this derives from the fact that Cyprus is divided. And there is a green line which divides the country, and this is basically a route for people to come in from the north, and this creates a major situation. But people don't want to touch this. They want to leave this. So basically the government is in denial about how to resolve the issue of these broader matters that affect things. But again, I agree with you totally that this is not an issue about migration.
Yorgos, one last quick word from you.
Yes, I think that this illegality rhetoric is a rhetorical box. Yeah, it is used everywhere and all the time, and it's a big lie to a great extent because, as Nico said before, the pogroms were against more or less fully integrated immigrants. So the problem, although in rhetoric is communicated as to concern illegal immigrants, regular immigrants, in actual reality, irregular immigrants are just a small part of the whole picture. These people are against immigrants, and not generally speaking immigrants, because obviously there are many Russians and Polish and Bulgarian and EU immigrants in Cyprus. They are against immigrants of a certain color, of a certain religion, from a certain space abroad, and this betrays racism. This betrays racism based on criteria of discrimination, based on criteria of race, religion, and other demographics.
Gentlemen, we have to leave it there because we're totally out of time, but many thanks for agreeing to discuss this with me. And it's interesting to note that another scheduled march was cancelled midweek, but as one of you said at the beginning, we're all on tenterhooks a little bit to see whether or not there'll be some more incidents in the coming days.
There's an anti-fascist march on Sunday. Another anti-fascist march. It was called yesterday.
I think that's the one in Eleftheria Square in the centre of Nicosia?
Exactly, yes.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. That is Professor Nikos Trimikliniotis from the University of Nicosia, who is also the director of the university's Centre for Fundamental Rights, and Yorgos Haralambos, Associate Professor at the University of Nicosia in Political Science. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That interview was recorded a little earlier this week, and in fact on Wednesday night, when that scheduled and then cancelled demonstration against migrants was supposed to take place, I drove around town and there was a heavy police presence, particularly at the Presidential Palace, which was originally the meeting place for the demonstrators. But there was a gala dinner going on there, so perhaps that accounts for the number of police in that area. As it turns out, no demonstrators turned up there, but there were fears that little groups of fascists might try and enter the old town of Nicosia, where many migrants work, live, have businesses and so on. So I drove round there as well, and it was gratifying to see that on most street corners where potentially trouble might erupt, there were groups of 4 or 5 policemen and women just standing around but being there, and the night passed peacefully. As we've just mentioned, there is an anti-fascist demonstration in the centre of town on Sunday, but it remains to be seen whether or not the reported friction between different factions on the far right will result in more pogroms, or indeed a shake-up possibly in some of the political parties, which seem to be divided on how to deal with this very contentious issue. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.